Hi, my name's Laura and I poke brains for a living. Well, not as literal as I just did with that. It's actually a salt shaker. But in a more metaphorical way, you know? And if you don't worry, we'll talk about it. Because today I thought we could talk a little bit about how the brain works, specifically how the different areas of the brain work. I wish I could talk about how the brain works in general, but there's just so much. There are many approaches we could take to look at the brain. We could start at the tiniest little bit, or we could start at the biggest bit. And I personally think, because I started at the tiniest bit, I think some things make a lot more sense when you start with the big bit. So we're starting with the big picture, which is the different brain areas and what function they do or are related to in the human body. When we're looking at the different brain areas, we usually talk about their functionality and what they do or are mostly related to in the body, because quite frankly, every bit kind of informs every other bit. But some researchers have found out that, for example, one area is associated with movement, one area is associated with personality, and no, we are not going to talk about how they did that, because let's just say ethics have not always been that much of a concern to some researchers. A way of imagining how the brain works is think about companies, which is a bit boring, but trust me, okay? Imagine you have 4 different buildings. Each of these buildings has many floors, and in each of these floors there's many offices, and in each of these offices there's many different desks. If we assign each company building to a brain area, then we could say, okay, in this brain area all of these floors handle these calls, and on these floors there is this office that handles this specific type of criteria that we need to be talking about before we talk to the next floor, which has the office that does the actual execution. And if you talk about, for example, talking, you would have one floor that's like, okay, we want to talk. The next floor is like, cool, what are we going to talk about? And in the next floor there's this one office that's handling the thought process, and then there's another office on another floor that's handling the actual vocalization, etc., which you wouldn't believe that brain does that if you're listening to what I'm saying. But let's start looking at the actual areas I want to talk about. First, I want to talk about what makes you, which obviously your entire brain contributes to that, but specifically the frontal lobe. From conscious decision to attention to movement to a lot of processing, it all happens in the frontal lobe. So you might imagine a very big company building with so many floors and offices, and they all have to handle so many different things. A very good example to go with, because a lot of my research focuses on motor and movement, we want to take a look at the motor cortex. The motor cortex probably takes up a couple of floors in the frontal lobe building, and there's going to be several offices that deal with the same thing, like motor initiation, controlled motor movement, tremor suppression, and they all kind of work together to make sure that this is a smooth movement, baby. For this movement to happen, it's like a production line. You have the initiator, you have the person that does all the calls to, like, okay, we need to have this tremor suppressed, we need to have this finger moved, we have to have the other fingers not moved, we have to do this, and then finally, at some point, all of this information is going to be sent to a whole other building, which is let's call it the spine. And then from the spine area, that information is sent through the rest of the body for me to be like, if you're wondering, that's quite a lot of effort for some pretty silly movements. Yeah. That's why the brain needs so much energy. And if you're thinking, wow, this sounds very complex, it that's because it is very complex. It's why we still don't fully understand so much about the brain. There's so much to it. And you might be wondering, hey, if the frontal lobe does all of these things, what do the rest of the brain areas do? Which brings us to the temporal lobe. This little fella is located roughly here. Like, I'm gonna obviously have a look. It's right there. But for your visualization, it's roughly located around here, with having a skull and hair and ears and all of those things in comparison. Based on the position so close to the ear, you might be correct in guessing that it has to do something with auditory processing and processing things that have to do with auditory processing, like speech processing and music processing, but it also has to deal with some of the memory processing that we do. Funnily enough though, and I did not expect that to be located in that area when I first started looking at the brain, it also is where you process a lot of smell. And as you can imagine, this company has very, very distinct floors, and even though they don't always work with each other, they work a lot with the other companies in their area. The ability to connect between the different companies is handled with the parietal lobe, who kind of acts like a consultancy firm. The parietal lobe handles a lot of the external input and connects us with the different areas and connections in your brain that need to have this input to make informed decisions about movement, whether it's voluntary or involuntary movement, and in general have all the companies talk to each other. If they want to communicate with each other, a lot of it has to go through the parietal lobe. This is also where a lot of sensory information in general is being processed, because the sensory cortex is right there. It's like right connected between the motor cortex, sensory cortex, and this is kind of in the middle there. It's where the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe are disconnecting. Finally, we're going to take a look at the occipital lobe, which is at the very far end of your head. If you're wondering what could be done here, well, that's where your vision is being processed. And if you're confused as to why, for some reason, visual processing happens at the part of your head that's the furthest from your eyes, I was confused as well. But there's actually a really good reason. There are loads and loads of sub-processes that require for the occipital lobe to be located where it is. Some of it has obviously in physical nature because of some of the intricate networks that need to occur in between, but not all of them are. But again, this is then communication that is being handled by the parietal lobe. I mean, not alone, but some of it. We have now looked at the brain and some of its most prominent areas, but to be more concrete, we actually looked at the cerebral cortex, because below this, under the hood, there's a lot more, and I also kind of ignored the cerebellum. But I thought this might be a really good introduction to get an idea of how complex the brain is and how some of it works. Because again, a lot of what I've been saying is a bit, it does this but not alone, it does this but not alone, and then there's this and it's connected with this but not alone. And you might be a bit more confused than before. I hope you're not. I wouldn't blame you if you were. There's quite a lot of resources I can link in the description if you want to have a more of a deep dive. But also, if you don't and you were like, I just wanted this to be really good at a pub quiz, because what if they ask me where auditory processing is happening, then now you can be the king of the pub quiz, or the queen, or the general royalty, and say it's the temporal lobe. Yeah, that's definitely why I did this video, so you can win a pub quiz. But not the point. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit, and I hope you feel more aware of your brain and what it does. Not in a bad way, but in a, oh yeah, nice, okay, I had a thought, probably from here. If you liked this video, I would really appreciate a like. If you have any questions, feel free to comment at any time. And if you want to see more on this or other topics, then feel free to subscribe, because I'll probably be talking about other brain stuff soon. Not exclusively, but some of it will be. So have a lovely day. Bye!